Okay, let's dive right into this massive roster of Death Note users and figure out what actually happens when flawed human minds are handed absolute godlike power. If you're a fan of this universe, you already know the basic rule, right? You write a name, you picture a face, and that person dies. But across the entire history of this lore, and I'm talking pilot chapters, the main series, post-series one-shots, the whole shebang, there have been exactly 19 human users. So, in this explainer, we're going to examine every single one of them to see how their unique psychologies handled, or in many cases completely buckled under, the weight of this supernatural weapon. To make sense of all 19 historical users without getting completely lost, we've structured this by looking at their core motivations. We're going to track their mindsets, moving from the true believers all the way down to the tactical masterminds playing 4D chess.
Let's kick things off with Group 1, the ideologues. These are the users who genuinely believed, deep down, that they were wielding this notebook for a greater cause. And honestly, we absolutely have to begin with the original Kira himself, Light Yagami.
Now just think about the sheer scale of Light's impact for a second. 70%. The source data reveals he reduced global crime by a staggering 70% and essentially put an end to wars. I mean, he started out genuinely intending to make the world a better place, but within just 5 days, wow. He developed a massive, unstoppable God complex. Despite his ruthless descent into psychopathy, killing innocent investigators who got in his way, this still earns Light an incredibly high mark of 4.5 out of 5. Why? Because he studied the rules of that notebook deeper than anyone else and miraculously kept his identity a secret for 6 entire years.
And this is where the psychological toll of the notebook becomes so fascinating, especially when we compare Light to a later user, Sira, who's also known as C. Kira. While Light possessed an ego practically made of titanium, C. Kira was completely different. He only targeted elderly people who actively begged to die online, essentially acting as an instrument for euthanasia. But when the new detective Nier went on live TV and simply called him a boring murderer, C. Kira completely crumbled. He stared at a wall for 3 days, screamed, and then literally wrote his own name in the notebook. That utter lack of mental fortitude leaves him sitting at a pretty mediocre 3 out of 5. If we dig all the way back into the draft pilot chapter of the franchise, we find early examples of users completely failing to handle the moral weight of this thing. Take Taro Kagami. He was just a 13-year-old kid who thought the book was a normal diary because the instructions were in English. He accidentally killed 5 bullies and felt so guilty he actually used a death eraser, yeah, that was a real concept in the draft, to bring them back. Then you have Miura, who panicked and killed innocent people to cover his tracks, dragging his score down to a 1.5. And worst of all, an unknown user from 1979 who killed his bank colleagues and then committed suicide out of sheer guilt. For these early users, the psychological burden was just way too heavy. But what happens when you strip away those grand moral crusades? That brings us to Section 2, the greedy opportunists. In this group, the notebook isn't a holy relic. It is nothing more than a financial asset. No ideologies here, folks, just cold, hard cash.
$10 trillion. Let that jaw-dropping number sink in for a second. That is the exact bid submitted by Donald Trump to purchase the Death Note. This whole absurd, high-stakes scenario was orchestrated by a middle school genius named Minoru Tanaka, also known as Akira. Now, Minoru scored the highest on Japan's intelligence tests 3 years in a row, but he had zero interest in killing anybody. Instead, he decided to auction the ultimate weapon to the highest bidder.
The really crucial point here is how flawlessly Minoru executed this plan. He used the Shinigami Ryuk's natural invisibility to hold up signs on live TV, announcing the auction to the world. When that massive $10 trillion bid came in, Minoru demanded the funds be split equally among hundreds of thousands of everyday citizens in Tokyo. So Minoru became the first user to completely outsmart Nier without shedding a single drop of blood. He successfully hid his identity in a massive crowd of newly minted millionaires, sparking this incredible economic boom known as the Kira bubble. For sheer unadulterated strategic brilliance, Minoru easily secures a highly respected 4.5.
Now contrast Minoru's brilliance with Higuchi, the third Kira. Talk about a downgrade. He was a corrupt corporate suit who couldn't even wield the notebook on his own. He literally had to hold weekly HR committee meetings with 7 other executives just to figure out who to murder for a stock bump. He was motivated purely by greed and, actually, a super creepy desire to marry Misa Amane for insurance money. He was easily tricked, quickly captured, and proved to be a pretty pathetic pawn who bottoms out with a dismal 2 out of 5. Of course, not everyone actually wants to be the mastermind. In Section 3, Pawns and Loyal Followers, we see how the notebook easily ensnares individuals who are desperately searching for a master to serve, or those who just tragically get caught in the crossfire.
Take Misa Amane. She literally halved her own lifespan twice, out of pure obsession for light. And the source material makes it painfully clear that light actively despised her. Now, she was undeniably useful. I mean, she made 2 literal death gods fall in love with her, but she left incredibly sloppy physical clues, which caps her score at a 3.5. On the darker, much more tragic end of the spectrum is FBI agent Ray Penber. Light brilliantly and honestly cruelly manipulated Ray into writing the names of his own investigative team on hidden pages of the notebook. Ray didn't even realize what he was doing until it was too late, resulting in a rock-bottom, heartbreaking score of 0.
Let's look at 2 of Light's most devoted proxies, Kiyomi Takada and Teru Mikami. Takada, she executed her role perfectly to secure a solid 4 out of 5. But Mikami? Man, he is a fascinating psychological case. He was highly intelligent. He thought exactly like Light, but his fatal flaw was his extreme rigidity. He adhered to such a strict, unbending daily schedule that when he finally broke his routine, making just one unauthorized trip to the bank to use the real notebook, his watchers immediately noticed. That single break in routine exposed the entire Kira operation, tanking his legacy with a tragic 2 out of 5.
All right, now we are entering the big leagues with Section 4, the tactical geniuses. This is where the notebook completely stops being just a localized murder weapon and becomes an instrument for absolute global chaos, bouncing between the world's greatest detectives, the police, and the criminal underworld.
First up is the legendary detective L. He is a completely unique entry on this list because he never actually killed anyone and he was never even the official owner. But once he physically got his hands on that notebook, he immediately deduced a legal way to test Light's fake 13-day rule by using a death row inmate. L perfectly cornered Light. His plan was absolutely flawless. He only lost because the Shinigami Rem broke the rules of her own kind, sacrificing herself to save Misa. Because L was defeated by unpredictable magic rather than a flaw in his own logic, he walks away with a highly respectable 3 out of 5.
After L, the notebook falls into the hands of L's successor, Mello, and the American Mafia, and the events that followed were just pure madness. Mello kidnaps high-ranking officials to force a trade. Mafia members test the book to erase their tracks. They force a subordinate, Cal Snyder, to make the Shinigami ideal literally at gunpoint. And then, boss Dwight Gordon uses those eyes to wipe out a 30-man Special Forces strike team. They even leverage the notebook to force the President of the United States to surrender to their demands. It was a terrifying, escalating display of weaponized tactics.
To combat these ruthless mafia tactics, the Japanese police task force had to make an impossible choice. They desperately needed someone to make the Shinigami ideal. As a quick refresher for those who need it, this is a magical contract where a human gives up exactly half of their remaining lifespan just to gain the ability to see the names and lifespans of anyone they look at.
And this brings us to the ultimate selflessness of the police force. Hideki Ida takes temporary ownership of the notebook for no other reason than to act as a human shield, preventing the mafia from seeing his director's lifespan, an act of pure protection that easily scores a perfect 5. But the most emotional user by far is Light's father, Soichiro Yagami. Tragically wounded in battle, he looks at Light with the Shinigami eyes. Now, because Light technically didn't have ownership of his notebook at that exact moment, Soichiro could see Light's lifespan. I love this detail. Soichiro earns a flawless perfect score because he is the only user in the history of the lore to die completely happy, tragically believing his son was 100% innocent.
And that finally brings us to the end game. Section 5, the ultimate winners. When the mind games ended and the dust finally settled, we have to look at the one person left standing at the end of the main series. We're going to end on this massive, lingering question. The source material drops a really heavy hint, courtesy of the character Matsuda, that Mikami's fatal mistake, that rigid break in his daily schedule we talked about earlier, actually wasn't a mistake at all. The theory suggests that Nier, L's true successor, secretly wrote Mikami's name in the Death Note to control his actions. Think about it. He forced Mikami to lead them to the real notebook before dying mysteriously in prison 10 days later. And Nier immediately burned the notebooks, destroying all the evidence. So, did Nier secure his ultimate victory by breaking his own moral code and using the notebook himself? It completely recontextualizes the ending of the entire series. What do you think? Did Nier cheat to win the game? Let that sink in as we wrap up this explainer.